Check one, check one.
Huh? I think so. We can. I mean, we can't do it for that amount. Yeah, I understand. Oh.
Yes, sir. Kristen, did you need to talk to me too, or no? What can I do for you?
Okay, we're going to be just a minute. We're waiting on a thumb drive for a presentation, I guess. Okay, we're going to be delayed about 5 minutes waiting on that video presentation that the whole meeting runs off of. The council actually has it, but it wouldn't be available for the audience, so we want to wait 5 minutes. Okay, we're going to go ahead and call this special called meeting of the Lawton City Council to order. Please stand for the invocation by Minister Charles Barnett and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you, Minister Barnett. Please call the roll.
Hankins. Harris. Chapman. Burke. Hampton. Fortenbaugh. Johnson. Warren.
A quorum is established. Business item number 1, consider the fiscal year 2023 City of Lawton proposed operating and capital preliminary budgets and take appropriate action if necessary to include making amendments to the preliminary budget to be incorporated in the final budget that council considers. Michael.
Mayor, Council, thank you for this second iteration of the budget process. In this particular budget meeting, we will be discussing our revenue of expenditures, which will be primarily our operations and maintenance and our personnel. So we will start with that. Joe Don, you want to start us off?
Yes, sir.
Want to get that microphone in there too?
Again, I'm not used to talking on a mic. I'm heard pretty well. Yes, I would like to start off with kind of an overview of where we left our presentation last week, or the 25th. Yeah, it looks like we've got it up.
Thank you.
This first slide that you'll see is just a reiteration of where we were at in our revenue mix from last year. For the current years, 40% of our revenue comes from taxes, 28% comes from charges for services, which would be our utility bills. Everything else is kind of mixed in there. Some of our items, such as parks and recreation and animal welfare, is not necessarily 0%. It's the percentage is just under 1%, so it's showing as 0 here. And again, the revenue schedule that I presented last week, and that is raising all fees and services by the 7.5 CPI. Again, just a reiteration of the 25th. What I would like to do is address some of the questions that I was asked last week during that meeting. And that is specifically what's the budgetary impact of not charging individuals for police reports? What's the budgetary impact of not increasing the garbage rates? And what's the budgetary impact of raising fees and miscellaneous charges by 15% and keeping the utility rates at 7.5% or raising them by a lesser percentage than what we talked about last week, the 25th of 15%. The first item is the individual reports. Quite honestly, for us to not charge for that service right now has a very low budgetary impact. We get about 2,300 report requests annually from individuals. At $1 per report, we're looking at $2,200. Very small, very minimal impact to the budget. I think the more overreaching question is fairness and what can we do based upon the open, what is available to us based upon the Open Records Act. Requesting a report by an individual or by a company is basically the same usage of that report, and that is to file a claim. Whether it's the individual coming in and asking for it or whether it is the insurance company calling us and asking for it, it's the same basic usage. I can't see how we differentiate between the two to charge for the service. Obviously, if a corporation or a company requests a large amount of information that requires a lot of research time, we do have the ability under the Open Records Act to charge for those and request for that payment up front before we do the work. As far as this question is concerned, I think my recommendation is going to be follow the example that's set forth in the Open Records Act.
Hey,
yes, sir.
Joe Don, just a quick add there to what you're saying. So that is true. However, on every open records request, we still have to do an analysis. And if it's in the public interest to release that document for free, we'll go ahead and do that. And then the other part of it is there has to be a substantial interference with government function.
Right.
So if you have one or the other, that's when you charge.
Right. I feel like we should just follow that same set of guidelines for any request. Whether that request, we did some quick down and dirty math on it today. And for these 2,200 requests, the 2,300 requests, we think probably the cost on that annually is somewhere around $11,000 of staff time. If you figure it's 10 minutes to pull the report, get it to somebody across the year, it adds up. So the next question is
Address that one while we're on it, if you
Sure.
don't mind. Because I probably wouldn't, just for speaking for myself, I can remember paying $1 for police reports for years. So it's clear we haven't gone up. I question whether we can produce one and pay the employee to do it for $1. If we're going to give them free to the citizen, I think we need to go up to what the cost of delivery is for corporations.
Well, again, there's an area that we may be limited to on because of the Open Records Act. For basic copies of stuff, we are limited to a maximum of $1.
Really?
Yes, sir.
Well, Joe Don, I think that's only if they're certified, right?
But most of our documents, I think, that we give
Okay,
out,
so-
especially at the police department, are certified.
So if they're not certified, the statutory cap is a quarter.
Yeah.
So I think the
Thank
point
you.
that Joe Don was trying to make earlier was we spend significantly more revenue, and I know it's a drop in the bucket on our budget, but 2,267 reports at 10 minutes on an average salary works out to about $11,000 a year. So it is an expense that we're not completely recovering, and I think that's applicable to other areas of the fee structure that we were looking at earlier, we were asked questions about. Statutorily, there's certain things we can do and that we should do. And in fairness, Joe Don, I talked about this earlier, if it's a data mining company, that's a little different. If they want 5,000 pages of something that we have to go through and redact, that's staff time, and John will make the determination on what that cost is. We're not talking about that type of application. We're talking about an individual coming to get a report. So.
Joe Don,
Yes, sir.
there's a possibility we could make these reports available electronically so people don't have to come down to the police department to get them.
That would be something we'd have to discuss with IT and the police department to see if that's something that's available. But of course, we have to realize once whether we can submit it to them electronically. If it's electronically in that they can go onto our website and search for it, then we realize that document then is open to the public. Anybody can go do that.
Right.
And there may be some legal concerns with that also.
Thank you.
I'll ask IT to take a look and see if that's a possibility. I'm not sure, because, I think it will still have to be processed by somebody. We can deliver it electronically, through an email or something, that is a resource, but somebody looking for it individually, I'm not quite sure we have that capability yet, but I'll ask IT to research it.
I just had a general question. So providing these reports, is that not a part of the job description, or is this something in addition to that they have to do when it comes up?
No, this is part of their job. All we're looking at, and the information I gave you earlier, was if it takes 10 minutes per person, that is a cost incurred. It is covered in their salaries. So it's not an additional cost, but it is the true cost of what it costs to provide it versus what we collect in the revenue. Does that make sense?
I have a comment to make if I could. Were you done? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Sorry. It is no doubt, I don't know, there's a guy in Florida that I knew he would get pennies out of phone, pick up pennies and but I think every penny counts. He's a millionaire right now with a big construction company. But I think that I'm hoping that as we go along, that the fee schedule, that we're not having that same kind of attitude about the fee schedule, that we are sort of going to try to not really consider the cost of what we're putting out. I mean, in my mind, I think when we budget, that we need to probably try to get, you can fix a budget from either end. You can fix a budget by revenue, or you can fix a budget by cutting spending. And I just think that we just need to kind of keep in mind, and that's a comment that I wanted to make, that revenue is another way of actually making sure that we get a balanced budget. Thank you.
And we are looking at the fees from that aspect of it, Councilman Hampton. We are, but unfortunately, there are some areas that we are statutorily by the state bound by, and copies, individual copies would be one of those.
Yeah, listen.
Yeah.
I do not envy any of you.
Yeah.
You trying to put all this together, and I wanted to go to say that I think you're doing a fantastic job and putting in a lot of time. And I for one appreciate that.
57 pages to the fee schedule. And cities that I've been a part of in the past, and Joe Don and some of our staff members, this is part of the process. That way that all fees get looked at annually and not just by an individual division or department that has a need. Now, that's part of it, right? Looking at the cost to provide those services. But when you look at it in this approach, and when you use this approach, then you catch those things. Like there was a designator on here at one part that was LAMPC, right, which is no longer even existing. So that should have been eliminated just by virtue of it being on there. It shouldn't have been there anyways. But when you look at the copies for things like a 36 by 60 copy, we had it as $1 before. Well, that's not even close to covering our cost. It's about $8.50 to provide that cost. If you look at the cost for council packets, if you want a council packet and you want a subscription, it was $200. I think now it would be like $215, somewhere in that neighborhood. And you divide that by the number of council meetings, you get a packet cost of about $8.96, and we were charging 25 cents. Now, that's all available online, so if you want it electronically, you can get the agenda online. It doesn't cost $1. But if you would like a copy in this case, what it costs us to make a packet is significantly more than 25 cents. So that's what we tried to capture. We would go back and look at our true cost. When you look at things in the fee schedule like the annual license fee or permit fee for a liquor store, and we do not have one for our medical marijuana establishments, right? Well, should it be the same as a liquor store? Some people argue that by the state it's considered a dispensary, but the DEA doesn't consider it a dispensary. It's looked at something else from on the federal level, so is it a dispensary or is it not? Well, if you consider it not, then it's more akin to some sort of other delivery of services, and should it be the same as a liquor store? Well, we've made that recommendation in this fee schedule that, for example, medical marijuana facilities pay a licensing or an annual fee of about, was it, Janet, $950? Yeah, $2,500. It's statutorily limited to $2,500. So those are the things we went back to look at. There's right at 100, a little less than 195 or so medically marijuana established type facilities, whether they're grows, dispensaries, or processing facilities. So you can see that, we're probably not inspecting them as much as we could. If we did increase the fee to that much, we could probably put on another code inspector and still contribute to all the other things that are required, whether it be legal, the manager's office, or everything in between to process all those applications. So we did go back and look at those. We made all the adjustments, minus the things that council asked us about last time. We looked at the garbage fees, which we'll talk about here in a second, on what those look like and the cost for those. And I'd like to move to that if that's applicable with the council. So next thing Joe Don talked about, and I'll take this one, which is, and he can chime in, which was the budgetary impact of not increasing the garbage rates? Well, we all know that truck prices have increased incredibly. They've gone up on average. Larry, how much truck prices increased? Yeah. So every year they go up anywhere from 10 to 30%. So a $300,000 garbage truck, last time we used it 10%, is now $330,000. So the savings that we incurred by going to bulk trash, unfortunately, we had wage inflation. We had things that occurred, not only wage inflation on the side of employees, but we also had cost increases for equipment. So equipment went up, poly carts went up from $55 to in the $65 or so range, is that right? So you can see that everything went up dramatically. So the savings that we did have was consumed by all of that. To have people to come and collect our garbage, Mayor, you and I have talked about this a couple of times, wage inflation, which is a very real thing. I took some notes on that in here in my budget book, and let me get to some of those for you real quick. The Society for Human Resource Management predicted that this year alone, wage inflation would be 3.9%. That's on top of what it was last year. So you're looking at about a 6.2 to 6.4% in wage inflation. Forbes predicted that wage inflation would be 2.1 to 2.8. So if you add that to the previous year, which was 3.4, you're looking at 6.2 to 6.5, 4, 5 in that range, and that's just on wage inflation. When we get into salaries and standby pay, you'll see that we kept our inflation, I think, at a very fair number. It was about 5%. So in that regard, in that budget year, we had to maintain that adequate level of services, and we did adjust some of the salaries and some of those critical positions, those boots on the ground, as I like to call it, are people who drive our solid waste trucks, are people who are out repairing our roads and our water mains and our sewer lines, and you can see that we have a need for that because almost daily we have a water line break where they're out spending 6 or 8 hours repairing a water main. So in that regard, back to our slide, it says, the result would be a $758,286 decrease in revenues, which would push our fund balance. And our fund balance is that amount of material or the amount of money available that's free of debt. It's not attached to any debt. It's there in case there's an emergency or we have to do something that becomes unexpectedly, right? It's available, would push it up to $9.93 million. So that's what we're taking out of our fund balance. So that's, in other words, the less decrease in revenue, the more we have to take out of our savings. I like to look at it as a savings, right? So yeah, we're balancing our budget, but we're taking more out of our savings. And if we don't keep up inflation with wages or materials and supplies, we continue to pull down our savings, right? So we need to look at that and make serious recommendations, which I think we have, and you guys should consider what Joe Dunn talked about earlier, and we'll get into that in a minute. But if we do not do that, then we're starting to pull down those savings.
Okay, I just want to clarify. It's my impression that your wage inflation for CDL drivers and departments like solid waste and public works is higher than that. Is that an average for the whole city or what?
That was an average on, over all salaries. That was salary from year to year. That would have been the salaries from 22 adopted to the 22 estimated expenditures, which would be a 5% increase. Now, it will go up in the following years because, A, they're being paid more, and those benefits and other ancillary goods cost more as well. But over this past year, we kept our wage inflation at 5%. So I think that's important. But yes, in some areas, it was more than others. For example, since you asked, Mayor, I think our solid waste drivers were entry level at $14.89. Is that right, Larry, before? Yeah, somewhere in that range, and it's about $18 now, high $17, $18 in that range. So yes, that is more than the 5%, but across the board, 5% for the 21-22 budget year.
And I think one thing that is important to mention here, that since City Manager brought it up, that as you know, it's okay to draw down our fund balance if we have to. Where it becomes a problem is when we start drawing it down year after year after year to balance our budget. We'll get to and if we do that, we get to the point where we can't draw it down anymore. We're at the bottom of the level. And when we have to do rate increases, and I say this because I've seen it in my experience tells me this, that when cities are at that point and they have to come back and do a rate increase, it's a 20, 30, 40, 50% rate increase, not 15 like what we're recommending now. Just, I mean, that's extreme examples, but I've seen it where it's been bad.
Michael,
Sir?
the 758,000 plus number, is that based on not doing a 7.5% increase?
That would be, Jordan, correct me if I'm wrong, that would be based on revenue lost if it was a 7.5%
That is
increase.
correct. If we, at the 7.5%, if we did not do that, at the minimum of that, this is the amount we would lose. Yes, sir.
So we do 7.5, we're going to lose this.
If we don't do 7.5, we will lose this.
Okay, I
If we
got
do
you.
7.5, we will increase, our revenues will be above last year at $758,000.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fortenbach. Ms. Johnson?
Yes. And so in this 758, is that, you mentioned vehicles increase and the poly carts and those things. Do we have, are we on track to start purchasing more vehicles again? Is that?
Correct, and that will be a discussion for Friday. We talk about equipment, or Reverb, our vehicle replacement schedule, and I will tell you that we'll be purchasing a lot more vehicles this year, and we'll get to that on Friday if that's okay, but yes, that is part of it.
Okay, yeah, I was just specifically for our,
Correct, that
Garbage,
contributes
not
to the,
everything
that
else.
portion of it does help, but the Reverb is a standalone fee on its own. This is just to cover cost for carts, operating costs, diesel fuel, and I misspoke on the cost for cars or trucks. Excuse me, I misspoke on when it comes to vehicles. That is paid for out of the Reverb, which is a separate fund. That is to cover salaries, chemicals, diesel fuel, repair costs, tires, things of that nature.
This was, when we did raise the rates, when we did the switch over to trash, bulk trash pickup and whatnot, part of that money was for the vehicles. I think, if I remember the discussions,
There was, we used some CARES Act money at the time to buy the solid waste vehicles, bulk collection vehicles, which the CIP still technically owes the fund back for that.
Right.
But yes, we bought about $1.65 million worth of equipment out of CARES Act money, which technically should have been out of the CIP money or the Propel money for that.
So just for clarification for the citizens, we broke even, and I think you just mentioned this a second ago, we actually broke even because of inflation, the inflation and the consumer price index, when we made the extra money when we raised the bill this last, in the middle of this last.
Correct.
budget.
I didn't go down into the detail, Mr. Hampton, I'm sorry, I didn't go down into the minute detail of it. But yes, from what I've read and studied, that more or less kept us even.
Okay. Thank you.
On the next slide, if we would, this is what Joe and I put together. What's the budgetary impact of raising only fees and miscellaneous charges by 15% and raising the utility rates at 7.5%? So Joe Don, you want to go into that one?
Yes, by adjusting our fees and everything by 15%, but keeping our utility rates at a 7.5%, that's going to generate additional revenue over the 7.5% across the board of about $1.3 million. So that's going to increase our revenues from what was listed last week and what's listed earlier in this slide of this presentation on page 3, from 189 million to 190.6 million is what that would do. So what does that do for us? That means we're using less of the 9 million plus fund balance to balance out our budget.
So the difference is 1.3 million.
Yes, correct.
So the first 7.5 increases our revenue 1.335. The next 7.5 would increase it another 1.335. Is that right?
No. This is a 15% on just the fees. Our utility rates, I mean, across the board, it doesn't increase.
Oh, okay, I got you. Thank you.
Because we were asked to look at
Yeah.
utility fees separate from all the other miscellaneous fees.
Okay,
So
very good.
by that split, $1.33 million, which still causes us to draw down that fund balance. We're still drawing it down. It's just an increase of revenue of what we had budgeted at 7.5, but it still doesn't put us where we need to be.
So that statement was made, if I remember right, by Mr. Warren, and it was in reference to not going up 15 on utilities. Could we go up 15 on fees? So my question has to be, how much was that extra 7.5 going to raise by raising the utilities? 15 instead of 7.5. Do you follow my question?
Yes, sir, I do believe I'm following your question. I do not have that answer here for you today.
Okay.
I'd have to look that up in my reports.
Okay.
I don't have an answer for you today. I can get that and report back on Friday for sure.
Well, we get
Thank you.
closer on the next page, I think, to the answer you're looking for, but it's only at 10%, so it'll kind of give you an indication of the trend, and we'll get you the exact answer. So the next page was, what is the budgetary impact of raising only fees?
Well, excuse me a second, but
Sorry.
before you go, just
Yes, sir.
one quick question. We're talking about, when we talk 7.5 or 15, we're talking about across the board for all water accounts,
Correct.
including commercial, industrial.
Correct.
We're talking across the board, just for clarification?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Okay, thank you.
So on the next slide, and Mayor, I think it shows maybe the trend, and we'll get the 15 and 15 for you. We can get that answer. Maybe Kristen can have it here before we even finish the meeting. No pressure, Kristen. Okay. So what would be the impact if miscellaneous charges were raised by 15% and the utility rates, there's two of these there, never mind that. Y'all didn't see that, okay? The utility rates at 10%. Well, that would push, the previous slide, you saw 1.335 at 7.5 for utilities. If you went to 10%, it would push that up to 2.5, right?
Yes.
But again, we still haven't got to the point, and we won't in this budget year, of breaking even, or meaning not using any of our savings, quote unquote. It just lessens the amount of savings that we would pull from. So 1.335 at 7.5, 10% would be 2.54, and we'll get you the 15, Mayor. I believe so, yes. Well, it would probably get us fairly close. We'll get the right answer before we end. I do pretty good math on the fly too, but I don't want to speculate on that one. Yeah.
So what I was looking at,
Mm-hmm.
the statement was in reference to raising fees so we don't have to go up as much on utilities. 1.3 would be raised by fees. 1.9
Would be raised by a
if we left it at
2.5%
$7.5. Okay, so I know where we're at. We're at a difference between 1.9 and 1.3, $600,000 off, right?
Yeah, I believe
You
so.
agree? Okay. Thank you.
Well, we're doing math on the fly, so
Thank you for
I'm going to
humoring
defer
me.
to your math right now. I want to check it, but yes, I defer to your math. Because we're doing it on the fly, and I like to have my numbers checked. So that puts us where we're at. So, of course, if we went to 15%, we would generate more revenue. It would lessen our requirement on our unrestricted fund balance, which is important. Because remember we talked last week, we talked about that 10% minimum level in our unrestricted fund balance. We're at 15% now. What the percentage will be once we settle on everything, I'll be able to give to the council. But I estimate it'll drop in, what, 1%, maybe 2%, we'll have to see. So we're moving down towards the 10% when we should be moving up from 15%. And I think that's where that delta starts to grow, right? So Mayor, I think that's a good question. What does it generate? We'll get you the answer, and that'll help us make that determination. So that puts us at where we were. And I hope we answered the council's questions. If there's any more clarifications, at least on the fee side of the schedule, please let us know, and we'll try to bring that question back to answer for on Friday if possible.
So I'm guessing that if we do 15 and 15, then it's going to be about 3.7 million increase in revenues. Is that correct?
I'd have to defer to your math, Mr. Harris.
Okay.
I'm going to have to do the math on that and see where we're at.
Well, 2.5% difference made 1,208,000, so 5% should be 2.4, basically, I would think, million additional.
You didn't answer that question yet, Kristen?
And I will say that on some of the numbers that I gave you last week, or on the 25th, we may be, we're probably modifying those numbers now to get closer to our target. Because I believe last year, at the last meeting, I actually said if we increased all rates by 15%, that would allow us to put $7.8 million into our coffers, into our fund balance. But we are refining those numbers as we go along and answer some of these questions that you've proposed to us.
So basically, each percentage point generates almost $500,000.
That's about right.
On just utilities, yes, sir.
Okay.
Can you, when we come back like Friday, what I'm unclear about is how this affects the unrestricted funds. So show, okay, if we do 15 and 15, this is how much we're going to have to tap into.
So you want to, just make sure I hear you correctly, you want to show, let's say, I think what we were at 9 million and some change that we're pulling down the fund balance. I think last week it was 9.17 million. So you want to see what those changes do to lessen that pull down, right? So let's say it goes from 9 to 5. You want to see that, we can do that.
Yeah, I just don't want the unrestricted fund to go down.
Correct.
I know you don't either.
The important thing to me, I guess, is maybe the same thing, except my Eisenhower math is not catching up. I want to end up knowing where the break even is, because we don't want to be lower than that for sure, and we'd be well advised to be above it a little bit so that we have a running start at the next budget.
If you recall, last meeting, we did speak about some things that were unexpected cost, right? At one point, we did move to a fully funded healthcare program. Well, even moving to the fully funded healthcare program gave us a fixed rate, which is good because it's being managed by a third outside party. We still had run out from that previous program, meaning claims still came in that wasn't the responsibility of Blue Cross Blue Shield to pay. So that was another $2.5 million that we had to cough up, so to speak, out of the general fund. Now that won't occur again, hopefully, because we're managing it through Blue Cross Blue Shield. The same thing has occurred more or less, and Joe Don spoke last week about our pension system, that we weren't fully funding the contributions to our pension system. Joe Don's done a little bit of work, and I think preliminarily we can say that still needs more review, mind you, but OKMRF is interested in talking with us about taking our pension plan. But one of the things they want to ensure that we do is that we fully fund our pension contributions yearly. And we haven't been doing that since, well, I guess the late 90s, early 2000s. So for them to take it, they want to be assured that we're going to make those contributions so we don't pull that particular retirement fund down to where it's unsustainable. So that's an important note. All those things that we've talked about start to pull down that unrestricted fund balance, right? Some of them are unplanned for, like the healthcare cost, that was unplanned for. But if we go into the budget year knowing we're pulling it down and we don't make sufficient adjustments, then, Mr. Warren, what you're talking about is we're not really taking care of our fiduciary responsibilities in this aspect of making sure that we adequately fund and don't drop our unrestricted fund balance below that 10% level. And as a matter of fact, we should be increasing it. So thank you for that question. Are we ready for the next slide?
We're ready for the next slide.
Okay.
Similar to some of the information I gave you earlier today and at the last meeting, I wanted to let you, or kind of present to you what the expenditure mix for the city of Lawton is. We can expect throughout our services that 33% of our expenditures are going to be personnel services. Personnel services are going to be things like salaries, insurance, overtime, taxes, benefits, things like that. Our next one is going to be other services and charges, which is about 20%. Other services and charges are going to be utilities, general liability and property insurance, training and travel, elections expenses, items such as this. Our capital outlay, and I'm going to combine these two items. We've got CIP at 19% and capital outlay at 4% for a total of about 23% of our budget is spent on capital items. Things that were allocated out for the Propel CIP plus any of our reverb, any of those items, that's going to make up about 23% of our overall budget. Debt service is going to make up about 2% of our overall budget. Materials and supplies, which are things such as office supplies, repair and maintenance, contractual maintenance, chemicals, uniforms, are going to make up about 10% of our overall budget. Miscellaneous items at 12% are things for such as depreciation, grant expense, bad debt expense, these type of items that we have to deal with on an annual basis. That's kind of our overall percentage mix. And then the next slide is just an explanation of what each one of those categories are, and I've already gone over that with you.
Okay.
Any questions about that you'd like to address?
Well, I like the idea that our debt service is only 2%,
Yes, that's a good thing.
but just thinking through it, 100% of ad valorem is debt. That's
Yes,
the way
it
it's
is.
designed. And I think about the other things that we have going, and that seems awfully low.
That's what right now, that's what we've got plugged into our budget. We can take back and go back there and look at that, and of course, we would want to look at that to ensure that that is accurate compared to point. But one of the things, too, we realize is that ad valorem and some of that debt is a long-term debt, 20-plus years, typically. So that would bring our annual, it stretches our debt service out longer, but it brings down the total amount of our annual debt service that we pay.
Thank you. You work in it every day. I was just
Yeah.
making a comment.
Right. It is a very low percentage, and it does reflect well on that reflects well on our credit rating and other things like that. When we go to borrow money, we get preferred rates and such. So it's a good thing to have low debt service. It's always a good thing, whether it's personal or professional.
Currently, our credit rating is a AA minus, which is a good rating. It's a very good rating. And like Joe Don said, that gets us preferred or preferential rates when we go to borrow money. So doing both of those things, watching your debt, keeping your debt service low, keeping your unrestricted fund balance where it needs to be, all those things contribute to that AA minus, which helps us. So it's a balancing act, Mayor, as you well know, but it's critical that we watch it.
For the sake of...
It's just interesting because that's not what we read on the internet. We read that we're hawking the farm up, so go ahead.
What?
sir.
Yeah, it's no doubt that for the sake of the constituents and them understanding that part of the things that you guys are doing, Michael, is getting us to a point where we're getting out of debt and trying to get to a point where we have a lot in the savings so that we don't run into this problem again.
Right.
And as we go there, that's part of this process. But I would like the constituents to know that there's that backside of it, that we came into part of a mess and that we are trying to get out of it, and we are getting out of it.
Right. We are.
From this conversation.
Case in point, our pension contributions. That's something that we weren't doing as well as we should have been doing. And we should have been making 100% of those contributions. So that's case in point. Next slide.
Okay.
Any
This is
questions?
going to get us, the next set of slides are going to get us into the presentation of our personnel services category and what it costs the city with the employees that we have. The payroll mix, and to let you know, right now we have a roughly $75.5 million personnel services budget. Of that $75.5 million, 65% of it is salaries and wages. 15% is pension, life insurance, health insurance, 8%, workers' comp 2%, taxes 3%. We do have some minimal unemployment tax payments we have to make, and minimal holiday pay and things like that. They're there, but they don't register to be a percent yet. Yes, sir, that is on page 14.
That slide, are you talking about the numbers, Mayor? The numbers are not.
The
are
numbers
in
you do have, they will be on page 22. Well, it's 10%, but if it's 10%, but as of this mix, when you account for all the other items that go into that category, it's 15% of what we can of our mix going into personnel services. Total expenditures are actually for pension, $6 million, a shade over $6 million is what we've got budgeted for general employee, fire, and police pensions. Okay. Part-time salaries, 1%. Overtime is 3%. Contract labor 1%. Some of these others are very low. The point of this is I wanted to make with this slide is that the majority of the money we pay out is in salaries to our employees. We've done a very good job of managing our health care and some of these other expenditures that we have that we get into. How this, and some of these are very hard to read, but what this does for us overall, you'll see that the salaries and wages are the things that are the items that have gone up dramatically. between 2022, which is this year, and 2023, which is next, we look at wages to increase from about 42 million, I believe is the number,
The 48.
43 million, 43.5 to $48.8 million in 2023. These are salary increases, wage increases, step increases, items such as this. Everything else, if we get down and look at it, there's very minimal increase from one year to the next. Overtime, for example, pretty much remains the same. What we expected to spend as a percentage. From last year to this year, we go from 1.9. This year's we've got budgeted at 1.9. This year actual that we're in 22 actual looks to be about 2.2, where we're going to end the year up at. So we're actually going to bring down our overtime a little bit if we're staffed the way we should be. Our health insurance and life insurance. Let me find that.
6.064.
It's going from it's going up from 4.7 to 6.0.
But if you look at original budget, which we projected for our budget, it's actually that's a little bit of a decrease.
Yeah. From our original budget, original budget for that area was 6.4, so we're budgeting less money.
Can you explain the incentive pay on this page 15? It looks like it's going to be lower for a budget for this next year.
Just looking at the incentive pay, which would be differential pay, I think I've got sick leave in there as an incentive pay, termination leave, holiday pay. When we add all those together, we're going down, and mainly for that because some of our other fees that go into incentives, some of the other things we pay going into incentive are going down. We're paying less terminal leave in the next budget year than this year because people have retired, and we have paid them out.
And to be frank, there's 100 less people being paid out this year. So there's 100 less salaries that we're paying. So that differential pay is not being hit as hard because there's not as many physical bodies to be there. So that what Jodan said and what I just stated would contribute to a lower incentive pay. We have budgeted for the appropriate number of salaries or salaries for the appropriate number of positions, and we'll get to that in a minute. But overall, for the past year, we've been about 100 bodies down, 100 people down, and it's not in just one area. I can't tell you that it's this position and that position is being always vacant. I can't say that. It kind of rotates around the city, right? So there's this rotation of 100 vacancies that tend to go from department to department. So when we talk to the department directors about cutting positions, which we did in this fiscal year, and we'll get to that in a little bit, we did cut some positions, but when we had to add back in some positions, the net decrease overall was about two overall positions. So you see some losses, which our Public Works and Public Utilities Department took positions away, but they added back in the positions they needed. They increased the positions to help try to offset that cost, and then we added other positions back in other areas where we needed increase. For example, and we'll get to that when we get to it. Hopefully, I don't forget to mention it. We talk about our jail, right? Jail staff is not adequately staffed with a number of positions, so we had to add some positions back. If we look at the fire department, and they had an extraordinarily large overtime budget as compared to previous years. Well, in previous years, what we would do is we would put an overtime number in, and then we would pull, once that overtime number was consumed, we'd pull from the salaries, which is okay, but it really doesn't give you a good indication of the number of hours overtime that are being worked by employees. So what you should do is you look at the number of hours employees are working, and you can do it dollar-wise, and then you divide that by the number of hours it would take to put a person in. And I usually use about 3,100 hours because that's a person and a half. So as your overtime increases and you add bodies, it should drop. And as your overtime increases and you add personnel, your overtime should drop. So it's a cyclical as the city grows, right? And if you're not growing, then it should stay about even. But in this case, when we look at particularly our fire department, for example, their overtime is over $500,000. Well, we budgeted $50,000. Well, that tells me right away that we do not have enough firefighters in that particular area, and we're wearing those folks out, and we don't want to wear them out. So we want to budget, since we're already spending the dollars in overtime, we can put on a few bodies, drop the overtime down, because there's always going to be overtime, and be better staffed or more properly staffed. And we'll look at that for other areas as well as when we do that. But that's how we went through the analysis of positions. So if you look at some of those overtimes and you're like, why was it so expensive? That's why. Less people, more overtime, more people, less overtime, and we got to balance that mix. So hopefully that answers your question on incentives, and it kind of explains some of the overtime questions, because I think we had an overtime question. Hopefully that hits that. What?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. You know, it is really important to get as many fixed salaries, fixed line items. Then you can really budget, because then you know what you're spending, and not have to keep making a guess at that. You know, for the constituents, you know, PSO gives that average monthly bill, and that makes it fixed, and that way you can budget your money.
Right.
And that's what we're talking about here, is trying to get to a place to where we have as many fixed items as possible.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
And I was one thing, Ms. Chapman, to answer your question, Mr. Hapner, did you get okay? To answer your question, and I forgot, we did have COVID incentive money, and I forgot to mention that. So there will not be that in this budget year, so that would also help contribute to the decrease. So Richard caught that. Thank you, Richard. As we talk about the payroll comparison to previous years, you can see that wage inflation is a true thing, right? We talked about that earlier about the Human Resource Management, Society of Human Resource Managers and Forbes predicting that 2.2 to 6.4% increase, and that's just on the wage side. That's not goods and services or materials and supplies. So, you know, we do see an increase in our salary and wages. So,
Do we have any other questions on this particular slide?
because we get some more discussion on the next slide where we talk about cost control measures. And I'd like to take a minute and brag on my staff. They've done a heck of a job. All of our directors have listened, they pay attention, they watch their budgets. They've done a heck of a job. Asked them all to go back and evaluate positions to see if the mission can be completed without the position before we hire that replacement. So ones that we particularly want to look at are that are very long-term vacancies, right? We want to look at those and see if those positions are necessary. I'll give you an example. City Attorney's Office and I had a conversation, right? To get high-quality city attorneys here, we had to increase wages. So John and I had a conversation. It means you can't have as many attorneys. So we gave up a city attorney position, right, to get better quality attorneys. And we have done that successfully. So we now have a very good city attorney's office, right, as far as attorneys go, but we did have to lose a position. So that's what we look at when we look at those things. How can we, either get a more proficient employee or a better qualified employee, or how can we do that mission with other assets or other tools that we already have in our quiver, so to speak. And then if we don't need those, we need to ask that question, do we need to hire that position? So we do that with every one of them, and our directors have done a heck of a job doing that. Then we want to make sure the position is graded correctly for pay purposes. We've done that. We've done that against all of our commercial competitors. For example, we compete with commercial drivers for over-the-road truck drivers. We compete with them for concrete truck drivers and garbage truck drivers outside of our employee. We compete with engineers, right? We're having a problem getting engineers, and I will speak with you all about a plan of that in the future on how we address that. Attorneys, other specially qualified or highly qualified skilled employees, and they don't have to be degreed. These are people like wastewater treatment employees with certificates, so it doesn't have to be a degree to be in this highly qualified employee. So we look at all those things.
Michael, I think this is really important, what you said just now, because, and I think maybe I may be speaking for the council, many times we're asked for, what about accountability? Mm-hmm. You're laying it out here right now on how your department heads are making these decisions based on a balancing act at sometimes. And I hope residents are listening right now that we are trying to be accountable with every single dollar that we have here in this city. So thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am. You know, our employees, we have very good employees, and I'm going to brag on them a little bit more if that's okay. And we have very good leaders of those employees, and they take their job seriously. They are concerned when we get a call from any one of you folks or our constituents, our citizens, about an issue. They take the time to go out there and address issues. Mayor, you know, they get out there and replace those potholes usually within 24 hours, yeah? And every other call that we get related to an issue that we need to address, they're very vigilant about doing that. But there is only so many employees and so much we can do in a day, but our citizens should know that our directors and our supervisors and our employees care about what they do, they're involved in what they do, and our management staff is ensuring that we're accountable to our citizens for the dollars that we have. So thank you for that statement, Ms. Chapman. And then I said previously, over the past year or two, our city has been continuously down about 100 estimated positions, right? And I have an idea that I'd like to bring back to y'all in the future. I'm gonna keep it kind of close to the vest right now, but if that holds that way, no, I won't. I think I'll mention it now. If it holds at this position, I'd like to come back to you in the future about compensating some of our employees possibly with some of this savings if we continue to hold at this level, because these folks are doing more with less, and they're out there getting the job done. And if we have that, now we need to budget for that, and we need to keep those that salary there, but at a certain point I believe we could probably let go of some of that. And if that's the case, I'd like to come back to y'all in the future if we hit those milestones and ask for y'all to look at maybe a one-time compensation of our employees. So that's just an idea. I vetted it just a little bit with Jodan today as we went through this, because I looked at that and we're doing it without 100 folks. But we can't really do without the positions because those things change from position to position. So as they move around, if we stay at that number, I'd like to come back to y'all in the future. So if that keeps it in perspective, I do everything I can to try to make sure that we're taking care of them, because they're the ones that take care of our citizens.
Michael?
Sir.
So, and you've had this, you explained to me before that the pension, the pension we're offering now is significantly different than the previous one. I would encourage that any monies we spend in the future, we might look at improving the pension plan.
Correct. And what Jodan had went and spoke to OKMRF about was about, A, will they take us? And then the next questions we need to address an employee, if you want to call category of taking care of employees in that sense, is the plan that we have sufficient? I do not believe it is, okay? The DC plan is not really attractive. And as compared to other cities, we want to talk about that for a minute. The city to the south of us, their pension contributions are 21%. What most cities in Texas do, and we can't compare ourselves to all the cities in Texas, and we'll compare it to some here in Oklahoma as well, because Jodan worked at some of those, and so has Janet. But for the south of us, it's 21%. Employee puts in 7%, city puts in 14% for 21%. Now that ranges in Texas from 15 to 21, depending on what their contributions are. In Oklahoma, a lot of cities are in the 14% range, right? And we're in the 7% range. Once we take out what we take out to help supplement the DB plan, which is the old defined benefits plan, once we take that out, so to speak, or the employee doesn't see that, the new employee doesn't see that, that goes to help supplant that old DB plan. What you end up with is 3.5% for the employee contribution, 3.5% from the city. So that 7% does not make us attractive. If that other 6% or 6.5% were added back in, then we'd be right there on par. So yes, we do need to look at that, and it's going to take time. I mean, it's not an easy nut to crack, that one. It's going to take time to look at that one. But I've had many conversations, and I think we've lost some very good employees because it just wasn't an attractive plan for us currently.
And one of the things I'd like to kind of piggyback on that is that in my discussions with OKMRF, the ability to fund our pension is only one of the things that we're needing to do. There are other things that I'm working with legal on, and our pension attorney at McAfee and Taft on, is to get some IRS rulings that we need to have before OMRF can even look at us. So there's a lot of things that we're working on moving that direction. I think we are moving that direction, but it will take a little bit of time.
You can see we've been on this road since 1998 to get to where we are. It's going to take a little while to get back to where I think we need to be. And there's another component to it, which Tim always reminds me of. It's how when we have a judgment against us, and our judgment actually has a component of our pension system. So that's another aspect that we'll have to look at. And there's ways to deal with that, but we'll have to look at it. So hopefully that answers your question, Mr. Harris.
I had a general question.
Ma'am.
We mentioned that we had about 100 positions that haven't been filled, and that, do we know what that dollar amount is that's built into the budget for those?
We'll just use an average. If you use an average of $50,000 salary and benefits for an employee, it's about $5 million. And that's an average. That's not the exact cost, because I'd have to go back and figure each individual position to get it. But if you average it out at about $50,000 an employee, 100 positions would be $5 million. It could be a little more, depending on how much they're paid, but that's a fair number to use.
And one of the things that we ran into on that, in calculating that number of what those 100 positions would cost, they're not any one point in the year. It's not the same 100 positions. At one point in the year, it may be mostly parks workers. At another point in the year, it may be mostly water workers. So those positions float around the city. So getting an exact cost on what those open positions are is a real hard target to hit.
So would it be helpful to get like a snapshot every 3 months or something like that to kind of help see where we are with that, or?
I'm not sure, I mean, we could do that, Ms. Johnson, but I mean, I would like to know, I guess it would tell you on every 3 months where we are dollar-wise. I don't know how long it would take to prepare that, but we could look at that if that's what you guys would like. I look at it from an annual point of view, and over the annual or the past year, we've had those 100 vacancies, and I just use an average number to average it out, and it gets me to about $5 million.
So are there any positions that we see a trend in that we're not filling that we can kind of get rid of,
Well,
or have you done that already?
As Jodan said, it tends to move around the city, and maybe Dwayne or Richard can speak a little more eloquently about it. But what I've seen, at least from the request for employment that I've seen, range anywhere from E911 to parks employees for maintenance of parks, for example. And they tend to rotate around, and the next time it might be public works needing laborers, concrete finishers, things of that nature, and then it could be solid waste drivers, and then it could be, it kind of moves around, right? I think that has to do with a lot of with the economy, whether or not the oil boom business is going big, because some of those jobs are attractive to folks that have skills that apply to that, and they go and drive. But when they come back to us, we got to be attractive, and compared to other cities in Southwest Oklahoma, I think we're very good. But when you compare us to an Edmond, a Norman, a Moore, we're not quite at that level yet in competition. And believe it or not, we will have people that will drive all the way to Norman, Edmond, Moore to work from lot, even in municipal government. So hopefully that kind of gets you,
It's no doubt that there's some other cities and big municipalities pay more, but cost of living is higher if you live there. Thus,
that's correct.
It would be them driving up there to try to.
Yeah, that's a fair statement.
Yeah, bring that money back down here. Yeah. But is this a fair statement that in 2020 those 100 positions are different than, as far as cost-wise, than 2023, right?
Correct, because we have to budget for all the wage increases across the board. So all those wage increases, step increases, whatever we do in that regard gets applied to all those vacant positions, because we have to plan that they would all be there. So we have to plan for those increases. So the cost in 2020, for example, will be more in 2023.
Yeah. And I guess as we move forward, those some of the work of those 100 employees can be caught up in technology or machinery or anything. I mean, Is that some thinking that we're moving towards to make sure that the citizens get services?
That is
in
a
the
fair
different-
statement. As we see technological advances, we look to see if we can't decrease. And for example, when it comes to police records, we've had some technological changes there that are allowing us to make some changes. Dwayne can talk about that if you want. But yes, we have seen some reductions in records clerks because of the changes in our court systems that allow us to do that. So we're moving, you know, we haven't seen a great reduction in the number of personnel, but we're moving people to where they're more needed in some cases, and pushing employees to the areas where overtime is the greatest. So we might not have lost a lot of people, but that overtime allows us to be more efficient in some areas. Technology more efficient in some areas and move personnel to other areas. Next slide. Okay.
Next slide is going to be our materials and supplies mix. Again, like some of these other slides that I've shown you, and if you're looking in front of you, it's going to be on page 18. We've got overall budget for materials and supplies of approximately $22 million. Of that, 40% of that is repairs and maintenance costs. 14% is chemicals, 11% is petroleum products, fuel, and from there it gets spread around. 9% in contractual maintenance, and then the maintenance material for automotive is 10%. And I think what we see here is that the cost that we are having to pay, as we've discussed in the past, is going up. We'll get into some recommendations and things here in a moment, a recap over in the next couple of slides, but did want to bring this out. If you want to look at the individual grouped line items, I'd recommend you look on page 22. And you can see what the individual costs for those are, each one of those items that we've just talked about.
So I think when you look at page 22, when we talk about total materials and supplies, you see that our projected revenue is right in line with our original budget in this case. So again, our directors have done a very good job of continuing to provide services at the lowest cost possible. But you can see we've been drawing down our reserves, so to speak. And this same thing applies. Our stockage, whatever supply of pipe and materials that Rusty may have had, or whatever sand and or other materials that Larry would use, for example, that they drew down some of that stuff, so we don't have that stuff all on hand. And as we go to replace it, the cost to provide that same level of service has increased from $17.37 million to $21.826 million. So that's my humble high school math, so that's about 20% or so. But what we talked about when it comes to energy, if you look at the Bureau of Labor and Statistics on the energy side, which is not, what we're using for the CPI is a conglomeration or a summary of all those. At 8.5% right now is what it is. But energy is in excess of 30% on that same site. So this falls in line with what we're seeing, 20+% increase in our materials and supplies.
And if you look, and just to hit some of those highlights on those big areas, you see for petroleum products, which would be our fuel, we originally budgeted $1.5 million. Looks like we're going to end up spending $1.7 million, and we're budgeting for next year $2.4 million. Chemicals, we originally budgeted at 2.3. Looks like we're going to hit the mark at about 2.5, and we're budgeting about $3 million for next year. Repairs and maintenance, we originally budgeted 7.6. Looks like it's going to come in at about 6.5, but we're budgeting 8.7 for next year. So these are areas that our directors and department heads have really no control over. The only control we have over what we spend here is either we reduce something, we do with what we've got, we take money from another area and transfer it there to buy what we need, or we just have to bite the bullet and buy what we need. We can't haggle on the price, we can't haggle on the cost. It's a set cost. We have to, we don't have a lot of, we either pay the rack price for fuel or we don't get fuel.
And where we used to be able to get a bid for that would last 30, maybe even a little bit longer, 30 days. Now, Rusty, how long are they good for? A week? A week, maybe, if you're lucky. Sometimes the days change, the prices change daily. So, when you budget it, you're making a prediction, right? You're trying to prognosticate what the future is going to be, which is very difficult. But Mr. Hampton, you had a question on technology, and I'd like for you to turn to page 23. If you look at landlines, for example, in the 22 revised budget, we had $780,000 in there. We had some technological changes, and we forgot to turn a few things off, which was through our technological changes that we made. But if you look at what I wanted to look at is that $790,000 or $80,000 versus that $416,000. When we moved to VoIP, Voice over Internet Protocol, that allowed us to drop that finally after we got all the lines turned off. And when we moved out of the old PD building, we had to turn all those lines off, right? It took a little while to get AT&T to locate all the lines and turn them off. That's why we ended up incurring a little more cost than we thought we were for that year, but we finally got them turned off. Right, Judy? Got them turned off now? Okay, good. In the landlines, you can see, so technologically, yeah, we did see a reduction in that cost, but now it allowed us to spread some of those savings to other areas because we've seen an increase in other areas that we have to provide services and or supplies for.
And I'll go ahead and move on to the next
Yeah,
slide.
let me just make one comment off of what you said there, Michael. So it's no doubt we're discussing the areas that increase of cost, services, and materials and whatnot through all the components that make that happen. But there are other areas that you're talking about, like you just mentioned, that we are doing good at, and I'm assuming that from what you're saying that when we get that, when we fix that, let's say we fix the landline, then we can look at other short areas that we're
Correct.
short in,
Right.
kind of shore those areas back up to try to get a complete budget, and that's the direction that you're going with those areas that we are fixing and
Absolutely.
saving money in.
Yes, sir. That's a fair statement. The technological improvements that you saw allowed us to reduce our cost for landlines, so to speak, and that savings was applied to other areas in the budget. So, we did take every aspect that we could in savings and apply that throughout the budget to make this budget work. We still couldn't do that without drawing down some of our savings, mind you, because even all those improvements, even when we look at all the personnel, and we look at everything that we've done, we still couldn't make that a zero, which, we just couldn't do it. So we tend to draw down those unrestricted reserves. So, but yes, that's exactly what the philosophy has been.
Michael,
Ma'am.
on that same page 23, down close to the bottom, on the park improvements, that's a huge decrease difference. Is that correct?
Well, that's a capital item that we'll be probably better prepared to discuss
On Friday?
on Friday.
Okay, no
Yes.
problem.
Also had a question on page 23, down at the bottom, motive equipment. What is that?
Equipment? Motive equipment? Yes.
Oh, okay.
No. That's just an old account that's still active, that nothing's being budgeted in. All that has been switched over to Rebirth.
As we made changes in our budgetary system, our financial system, Kristen had to do a lot of changes from our what they were called before to what they are today. Is that fair to say, Kristen? So some of those lines that would have been budgeted in the old system were done away with. They were captured under other areas. So that's why you see nothing there.
And again, that's a capital outlay item that we're going to be better prepared to present to you on Friday. What I anticipate Friday's discussion to be is an outline of everything all capital items we anticipate purchasing, and where the money's coming from to make those purchases. And specifically on motive equipment, across, kind of give you a look into the future, so to speak. We're looking at spending from reverb account roughly about $8 million. That's going to be motive equipment, my understanding, anywhere from pickups to fire trucks.
Thank you.
So when you see Corey, and I told Corey not to get too excited, but if you see Corey in a new pickup truck, it'll be okay. He's driving around in a Prius right now that I think we've had forever, and he needs something that can haul stuff around, because you know those guys go out and have to move, pick up signs and what that nature. So if you see Corey out there, don't let him get too excited. That'll be a recommendation we're making for trucks. But we're not doing that just for them. We're looking at a lot of other different areas, right? To make sure that we have good equipment out there, that our employees are riding around in something that's worth the dollars that the citizens are spending it on, and we don't have a bunch of junk out there running around that should have been retired a long time ago. Let's move on.
Now, back to our services and other services and charges mix. This budget year, we're looking at about $34 million, just a shade under $34 million for other services and charges. That's going to be everything from professional fees, which will make up 40% of that. Insurance makes up 22%. Utilities make up 11%. That's going to be what our mix is. One thing I'd kind of like to point out here, because Michael and I talked about this morning, is our travel and training budget is actually 1% of that $34 million. That is an extremely low percentage to keep our employees educated on their positions. I would hope that in the future we can allocate more funds for that, because a better educated force is a more efficient force. A better educated force works harder for the employee, the employer. They're seeing some satisfaction in their jobs. And so in future years, I'd hope that we're able to do better than that. But right now, it's budgeted at 1%.
So, Mr. Hampton, another example of savings from technology improvements is you see that under landlines, there was a reduction in those costs. But unfortunately, John just keeps killing me on the illegal expenses, right? So we had to increase the legal expenses categorical items. So some of that was absorbed, for example, in that area. So we were able to take some of those savings and spread it out across various funds, enabling our city attorney's office to actually do the legal work that we need to do. And we're not afraid to do that. We've got a crackerjack staff now, and I think John and his team are doing a great job. We've got to give them the tools to do what they need to do with. And this is another example of how to spread those cost savings out over various areas. Let's go on to the next one.
This slide is going to wrap up our slide, this slide is a comparison of where we've been from year to year. And as you can see, for materials and supplies, we've ratcheted up a little bit every year. Other services and charges over the past 4 years, we had a dip in 2021 and 22, but we've gone back now above where we were in 2020 for 2023. And it's all a reflection of what our costs are going to be and what we anticipate our costs being for this next budget year.
But it also is an indicator of the work. If you recall, when I first arrived in 2019, after that first budget year, we talked about, matter of fact, in that first budget year, I spoke with both Larry and Rusty about who handles street cuts, for example, for utility repair street cuts. If you recall, and this is why you see this step, what had occurred was utilities would make a street cut. Utilities would make a street cut for a utility repair, and then would leave it over with the streets to repair that street cut, right? And that would come out of the street department repair budget. Well, we moved that responsibility to the person who incurred the issue, right, which was Public Utilities. Now Public Utilities is handling that. So their budget went up in that area, but we left the budget the same that year for the street department so they can actually do more work. So that's a kind of an example of how we start to increase our cost, right, by doing more work as well. So materials and supplies, you have to have that to paint and stripe roads, to patch pad holes, to crack seal, to do any of the mowing and things of that nature that we do throughout the city. And those are just ones that come off the top of my head. We have to have those materials to do that. Rusty needs pipe, you know. Got to have pipe, got to have valves, got to have meters, all those things to maintain those systems. And as you can see, as you look around the city, because you see our crews out there all the time repairing water main breaks, that we have some old water lines in the city, right? And we got an exciting tool that we're going to bring to you guys at the end of May. Our GIS department is going to present to you some new capabilities we have in our GIS department, which will allow us to do certain things. Like for Rusty's crews or for our meter services meters or anybody else that's out there looking, it'll tell you where our fire hydrants are, when they were installed, for example, when our water lines were put in, what type it is, when it was installed. So there's a lot of capabilities that help us look at that. And then, as you can see, we'll have a heat map and we'll look at where the majority of our problems are. And we'll know where the older infrastructure is and where we should be concentrating our efforts. This all kind of leads us to the next program that we have, which will be our capital management program. They've done a lot of work to it. It's still not quite where I want it to be, but I think it'll be enough to where we can be able to show you the capabilities of it and what it will be able to do. And when we get to that part of it, we'll be talking about the overall capital budget anyway. We're not looking at the individual line items or individual projects. We'll bring that back for you guys to approve. But those are some of the things that we're talking about doing, and I'm excited about those technological capabilities. Really pretty cool. We're also working with our GIS department, and I know we're off script a little bit, but our GIS department for work with our cemetery to provide an electronic instead of a paper-driven sextants book where it allows us to actually monitor and do all of our works at our cemetery electronically, right? And plot those electronically, and then those persons that are buried there electronically, which we already have some of those capabilities, but we'll enhance those even more. So I'm excited about the technology. Sometimes we don't lose people, but sometimes we gain more capabilities. And it gives our citizens the ability to go out there and look for their loved ones electronically if they live in another state. And I think that's important since we're a military community, because a lot of people come through here that are in the military and they have a tie to the community. And they want to see some of those loved ones that are in those areas. So that's really good. Let's move to the next one.
Yeah, Michael,
Yes, sir.
you're speaking of us moving along with our road improvement program and the X-ray that's being done. And,
Correct.
And thus, groundwork is being done to where hopefully this budget year we'll be seeing a more concerted approach to try to get our roads fixed and operable. I mean, some of the, it is no doubt that some of the roads that we have probably fall in disrepair under that research that's being done, correct?
Yes, sir. That capability will give us a more data-driven approach to our streets. It'll be a non-biased, non-opinionated number. It'll be driven by technology that evaluates the road through deflection and radar analysis, or LiDAR, I guess, actually, laser evaluation. And it will give us a number, evaluate that street on what they call a PCI, pavement condition index, and then we'll rate them from whatever they are, the lowest one to 100, which would be a brand new street. And then we'll be able to make decisions based upon that number of which roads should be evaluated first or repaired first. And that gives us a data-driven approach to that. So we will be having a presentation of that, and I don't remember the exact day, but I think it's coming up here pretty soon. Is that not right, Kaylee? When's the, what day will that be on? May the 10th. And you'll be able to see some of that stuff. So thank you for asking that question.
Michael, I'd like to compliment you as a manager, too. You're fairly new, and I know a lot of times the questions I get from constituents, does it take 4 people to fill a pothole? And I say we wouldn't have 4 people out there if we didn't need it, because we have management that is holds staff accountable in a positive way, and I think you've done an excellent job, and I tell the citizens that their money's being watched carefully. So
Ms. Hankins, thank you, but it's not me. It's absolutely not me.
it's a team,
It
but
is
you're
the-
leading it, so
Thank
there you have it.
I would like, if y'all would let me go do potholes one day, I'd love it. I'd absolutely. I asked Dwayne if I could go mow. He says, no, you can't mow because we need you to do other things during the day. But I would like to be able to do that one day. But if you'd like to go to this slide, operational expenditure summary, and I think we're getting close to wrapping up this portion of
This
it.
slide wraps up our, the budget slides for tonight.
So when we prepared this budget, we asked them to keep operational expenditures at 1% because we really were in the world of unknown. We're in the world of increasing costs, and we didn't know exactly how much they were, so we asked them to keep their operational expenses as low as possible for this next budget year, and they've done that. But the operational expenses came in at about 1.9, so I think they did a pretty good job of evaluating what we need to do to keep our services, that minimum level of services needed for our citizens. And then, as Jodan said, this happened because of the economic environment we're currently in. Inflation has been rising at about 0.5% per month, and currently it's at 8.5%. I know there's we had in our last presentation, we showed you a chart by More Inflation Predictor, which was about 15% estimated at that point. If it runs out through the end of the calendar year. So if that continues to rise at 0.5%, you can see we're going to be well above 10% before we even reach the end of this fiscal year. And then, as we spoke about also in that first meeting, chemicals have gone up significantly, some 123%, unleaded fuel 53+%, diesel 67%. Our rock hauling contracts are up. As a matter of fact, we've had some of our vendors look at us and say, I just can't bring you rock. I just can't do it. Because I would be actually paying to bring rock. And nobody's going to be in the business of business giving it away, right? So John, rightfully so, asked them to show us and justify your expenses, and we'll take a look at it. We want our vendors here. They're partners in the city. We want them to be able to provide the services that we need because we need that to build roads and to bed pipe. And then some of our other chemicals have gone up as much as 111%. And then if you remember correctly, DEF, diesel exhaust fluid, went up like 127%. So it's not all doom and gloom, but what we are saying is costs have increased significantly, both on the employee side and on the material side. And as Jodan and I had the conversation the other day, he said, Mike, if we don't have materials and supplies, we don't need people. And if we don't have people, we don't need materials and supplies. So we have to do this balancing act of what the appropriate number of personnel are, which I believe we're pretty good at that right now, and then what our costs are for materials and supplies to make the city operate during that time frame. And with that, that gets us through this budget presentation. There's information in the packet that you have. If you have any questions, you can email me or Jodan, and we'll be happy to try to get you an answer before the next one. The next budget meeting, we will be talking about capital outlay. We'll call it a capital budget as a whole because that's the way most cities do it, is the capital budget. Talking about capital outlay, where Jodan will mention, or Kristen will mention the number of vehicles that we want to purchase, which will be significantly more than we did last year. And then we'll talk about our capital budget, as in capital improvement budget. And just keep in mind, when we go through the capital budget, it's funded by a number of different sources, or what I call different colored monies, right? Some of them are grants, some of them are sales tax, some of them are property tax or ad valorem driven, some of them are grants. So there's different pots of money that those come from and different methodologies for spending those, right? And it's like Jodan likes to say, some of it's cash accrual and some of it's, revenue driven. So we'll get into that next time. It'll probably be a longer meeting. Please don't eat lunch if you don't want to. We'll have lunch catered in. Garver has been graciously, will provide lunch for us. So for staff and council members, we'll have about 35 lunches there, and that'll be about 11 o'clock. So if we happen to go past that, I'm going to apologize in advance. If we get a little bit before that, hang around so we can have some lunch. And we want to thank them for that. Is there any questions of me and staff before we conclude the meeting?
Motion for adjournment?
So moved.
And a second? Okay, I did hear a second. Okay, please call the roll.
Chapman? Hampton? Fortenbaugh? Johnson? Warren? Hankins?